Welcome back to the Alec Lewis Show. I am your host, Alec Lewis. This is episode 56, recording on Thursday morning, February 5th. Appreciate you guys being here. Today's guest is a guy you know well, and there's no question about it. He was the Vikings general manager from 2012 to 2021. He was with the team, had been with the team since 2006. His name is Rick Spielman. He currently does some work at CBS where he works on a podcast with a guy named Ryan Wilson called the First Pick Podcast. He also does some work with SiriusXM and has done a little bit of, consulting both with the Commanders hiring cycle and the Jets this time around. So I've got to know him a little bit through my course of covering the Vikings the last 3 years. Have picked his brain on certain aspects. And I don't know. I always feel like if I'm doing the best job I can, it's worth listening, learning, being curious, learning about the past that I wasn't obviously here to watch, to view. I know a lot of people have opinions, but talk to Rick about a lot of aspects this draft, the league as a whole, and kind of evaluating certain positions, roster building, and then the Vikings decision with at quarterback. So really appreciate his time. Enjoy doing it. As always, the show is presented by First Resource Bank. That's a member FDIC bank in the area. A lot of good people running that thing. Tim Siegley, Aaron Siegley, Charlie Anderson. Go check them out at any local branch. The one near Trader Joe's in Washington is my favorite. You can set up an account pretty easily. If you haven't, read my work over at The Athletic. I've got a ranking of free agents internally up on Thursday. And then, that's about all the housekeeping we got going. If you're new here, please hit that subscribe button. Multiple podcasts a week on Apple, Spotify, iHeart, everywhere you get your podcasts. So without further ado, we will jump right into it. This is Rick Spielman, former Vikings GM, talking about the Super Bowl, the draft, and more. Thank you guys for being here. All right, Rick, welcome to the show. Appreciate you spending the time. I know you got a lot going on, so I appreciate you being here.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on, Alec. And I know you were a big help to SiriusXM NFL Radio, and we had you on a few times with me and Zig Fracassi, so more than happy to return the favor. Plus the outstanding job you do with the Athletic, covering the Vikings and everything you do, and a good person, so I don't mind coming on with you at all.
No, I appreciate you saying that. I've picked your brain on draft stuff before, so we'll hop right into it. I guess first, I mean, it's Super Bowl week. You follow this stuff closely, I know. I have thoughts on the game, but yours are much more probably educated and predictive from the time you spend in the league. So just what is your lens on Chiefs-Eagles round 2?
Yeah, this would be very interesting. Both teams were built, if you look how they were built, very similar. I think 55% of the Eagles roster is drafted, 53% of the Chiefs roster is drafted. If you look at the 2022 Kansas City's Chiefs draft, that was the foundation of where they're at right now. They got to the Super Bowl that year. But if you look at, all the DBs, the defenders, that's McDuffie, Karlaftis, all these, they're all cornerstones of that team right now. And then if you look at the Philadelphia Eagles over the last 2 years, getting Quinyon Mitchell, getting Cooper DeJean, adding to that secondary. And I thought that they both supplemented their rosters well with some power trades. Especially in the signings. I mean, Philadelphia, it's Saquon Barkley's a no-brainer, and I think that without Saquon, if they weren't able to get that done, I don't know if they're in the same position that they are in today at the Super Bowl. And then, Howie made a great trade to go get A.J. Brown a few years ago, which really made a significant difference. So they've done a lot of things to help their roster. Mostly, though, when you look at the two rosters, they are built very similar through the draft, supplementing with free agency and also picking up a significant trade here or there.
Would you pick against Patrick Mahomes? I wouldn't, is why I asked.
I don't know. It's hard to pick against him because every time, he seems to come through. And it doesn't matter the numbers, the yards. He seems to come through, and he's been in this big stage. He knows what it's about. It seems that even a Patrick Mahomes can elevate his game to the next level, and I imagine we're going to see that this Sunday as well. But when you went back and when you look at this matchup, and Jalen Hurts had an incredible game in the first Super Bowl matchup, and the way he used his legs. I mean, he rushed, I think, for close to 70 yards and threw the ball extremely well. And if Philly would have won that game, because that ended up being a shootout, he probably would have been named the MVP of the game by the way he played.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, obviously. I told you I wanted to ask you about this, but I'm just curious, like, where your head is at in watching this season and last season too. But in terms of just evaluating these seasons, what takeaways you feel like you've had in terms of like roster building, trends in the league, stuff that you've noticed that you feel like applies to how we should think about like optimal team building at this point in the season and in kind of the phase of the NFL?
Yeah, I think that when you look at it, to me, it's always going to come down to your roster building, and you're always going to build through the draft. We saw Detroit, that took a little longer, but they, really held to their principles and how they were going to rebuild that culture, and they were very patient. They weren't very successful that first year and a half. Then all of a sudden, everything started coming together, and then they made a significant trade, getting Jared Goff, who probably was a throwaway at the time. In that trade. And then you look at the Commanders, and they went a little different approach. They added a lot of short-term veterans, but veterans that fit what DQ, Dan Quinn, wanted to build, and the Bobby Wagners of the world, the Luvas of the world, Jeremy Chins, all these guys came in to establish a new culture, and guys that they were familiar with, that knew maybe can get another year or two out of them from a production standpoint, but there's no question they're culture builders when you come in. And then, of course, hitting it out of the park and Adam Peters with Jaden Daniels, that kind of puts a cherry on top. And you have to say, without Jaden Daniels, I don't know if they had the same success without him at quarterback this year.
No question. You mentioned the Chiefs and the Eagles rosters, and we could talk about, Jalen Carter, Creed Humphrey, Jordan Davis, Nolan Smith. There's just so many guys on the front that these two teams have drafted, and it was a question that I had for you. I told you I was going to ask just about the value of interior offensive line, interior defensive line. Do you feel like those positions, you have to covet them more than you used to, than you always have, or you always felt like those pieces were integral? Like, how do you feel about those positions, the trenches in general?
I think that you're seeing, because of the way in free agency and last year, some of the monies that these interior offensive linemen are getting when they do hit the open market are telling you the value the teams are putting them in on right now. But, as you mentioned, Creed Humphreys of the world and those type of guys, and you forgot to mention a pretty good guy on Kansas City's defensive line, and Chris Jones. So those guys, they have, that's going to be a great matchup against the Jalen Carter, and you almost have to. That's one of the no one talks about it. Everybody wants to talk the quarterback and Saquon Barkley, who are extremely exciting to watch, but watch that matchup between the two interiors of both Philadelphia and Kansas City. Trey Smith, I think the guard at Kansas City, is another one. It's I think one of the best guards in the league right now. So I think there's a point of emphasis on that. I also think that if your quarterback is not very mobile or can move a lot, that keeping that pressure from collapsing in the pocket, so that pocket passer type quarterback can step up and still deliver. So yes, I think that the tight ends become very important now, especially in the passing game and how they can create mismatches, and I think it's the same thing. I think the game evolves. If you would have told me 10 years ago that receivers, because there were really good receivers, but it was almost like, well, we can find a receiver, we're never going to pay him $10 million a year.
Sure.
But now you see the impact that superstar or big-time playmakers have in helping the quarterback and helping the offense.
It's a great transition. I've talked to you before about Justin Jefferson and evaluating him in that draft. But when you think about that pick, like what comes to mind in terms of the evaluation for him and why you felt like you guys were as convicted in what he would become as you guys were?
Yeah, I don't think that you ever truly know until they get out there and actually start. I wish I would say I was that sure on. Yeah, I knew
no,
that
I'm glad. It's good to hear you say that.
Yeah, I wish I could have, our first draft with Adrian Peterson, I wish I could tell you I knew he was going to be as good as he was going to be. But I think the one common thing, it's no question how the coaches and the scouts and everybody evaluates them and what they do on the field. To me, in every great player that I've been around, it's all the intangibles that come with it. They know they're very good, but what takes them to the next level? That's their work ethic. That's their dedication. That's everything that they can do to go to the next step, because they have more than enough ability to go out and succeed in the NFL. But the guys that have that interwoven drive in them, or that ability that I just want to go out there and be the best I can be and work just as hard or harder than anyone else on the roster, even though they are one of the most talented athletes, they even have a bigger drive into becoming the best they can become. I think that's what makes the Hall of Famers, at least every Hall of Famer I've been around.
How hard is that to try to figure out until you're in the building with them? I mean, like, how do you even go about trying to assess that?
Yeah, you do. You have all the intangibles. You have all these different type of testings that are out there now. The psychological testing. We use HRT, which was very reliable for us. There's you do as much digging and as much information as you can get. But it's like it's a cliche, but do they love to play the game?
Sure.
And that is. You can see that on tape. You can see that, if you're out on a school call watching a practice. You can see that if you're at a game and how they interact on the sideline. I mean, I've seen some guys that is like really good players, but this guy is never going to get any better because he has the I don't give a crap attitude.
Sure.
He just knows he's just better than everybody. And then there's other guys that, as you watch them, and I think the other thing that's really helped too is you go to the combine, you have that formal 15-20 minute interview, but the follow-up, and ever since COVID, now every team has unlimited amount of Zoom calls with these players. So the more you can get around the player, you can take all these tests and all the resources that you have, but I think the more you get around the player, as much as you can get around the player before the draft, that also helps. I mean, we had very fortunate when we drafted Harrison Smith. I remember he was a pros pro down at the Senior Bowl, and we never had to talk to him again after that. We already knew what his makeup was, and we had the competitive advantage, in my opinion, that we saw him in meetings. We saw how he interacted with the team. We saw how smart he was and instinctive he was. So as much as you can get around the players, and it's more than just a 15-20 minute interview at the combine, that's what every team's striving to find out about these guys. And it's changed because now you have these college guys coming in that have these NIL deals.
Yeah.
And so if they don't like where to school, they can jump and go in the transfer portal every year, or they're asking for this money, that money. So I think it's harder and harder today to try to find out, which you have to, who truly is that competitor, that passion and love for the game that just loves to go out there and play ball.
You mentioned the draft picks. You said you never truly know. It was interesting. I was listening to a podcast with Eric DaCosta yesterday, and he was like, if we can just hit 75%, and I was thinking 75% is a lot. It's like a pretty high percentage. How did you view it in terms of, did you view it like by round, by part of the draft? Like, how did you try to evaluate what was success in this very uncertain world?
Yeah, we looked at it. We had our analytics break down us and the entire league. I was very big into self-scouting us and to go through where our weaknesses were, where we were missing in the draft. You're hoping the first round pick is going to be a really good player for you. But when you get into Saturday, when you get into the 6th and 7th rounds, to me, I always looked at that as college free agency without having to bid against everybody else after the draft.
Sure.
So, if you can hit 10% of those, 11% of those in the later rounds, then you're doing a pretty good job. But those guys, when you're drafting them on Saturday, you're hoping someone comes out like a Stephon Diggs or someone like that who we drafted. But those are the core special teams guys. Those are the backups that may not be able to start 17 games, but can go in for 3 or 4 games. Those guys have a lot of value as well, not only because they can do special teams, they can do a backup role that can fill in and the team doesn't fall off much, but you can't have veterans making $2 million in those roles. You have to have those draft picks because they really financially help you, towards the cap. So you have enough cap space. So, I think just thinking through now, like when we got a Metellus, Josh Metellus, guys like that end up becoming in special team players and then whatever. And I thought Brian Flores did a phenomenal job finding out what he does best and how he fits in the scheme. I've also had some misses too in that, but to me, whether it was the right philosophy or not the right philosophy, the more swings you can take, the better chance you had on hitting a couple guys in those later rounds.
Yeah, and we've talked about that, and it totally makes sense to me. It's like if the odds of hitting the dart throw are low, it's like why wouldn't you have as many throws at the dartboard as you could possibly have? You were just down at the Senior Bowl. What did you think of that crop of players, and what are your thoughts on this draft class as a whole? I don't know how much work you've done on it, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, I've done a pretty good amount of work on it. Still got ways to go. As you know, in our podcast, I think there's 78 days left until the 2025 NFL draft.
Of course.
Yeah, that's the only thing. That's the only purpose I serve on the draft show with the first pick with Brian Wilson. But I would say the thing that surprised me the most down there was how, and I thought Jim Nagy and his staff did an incredible job on all those non-power 4 players that came down there. The Darius Alexanders from Toledo, Gray
Zabel, the North Dakota,
from North Dakota State, the little sawed-off explosive pass rusher from Central Arkansas, Walker. There were a lot of guys down there that maybe weren't, I'm sure they were on teams' radars, but they weren't sure till they went down there. And I can't really think of a small school guy that went down there and didn't perform and help himself in the draft. So
there was like that Alabama A&M offensive lineman guy, I think, who's like really great length that even people were talking about, which is, again, it's a credit to their staff, really.
Right, for those guys to go down there and have an opportunity to compete on the biggest, stage in the offseason, for draft-eligible players, those guys really, really popped out. And you have to give credit to Jim Nagy and his staff for the scouting and digging they did. And I know they've talked to a lot of teams. A lot of teams were excited to see these guys on that stage down there. And that was maybe the best crop of non-Power 4 players that I've seen from top to bottom that didn't look out of place.
Interesting. What do you, with this draft overall, like how have you felt about it just watching, and evaluating as you typically do?
Yeah. I don't think the quarterback class is anywhere near last year's quarterback class. Probably 2 first-rounders. I don't know if they'll see through the pre-draft process if another one potentially sneaks in there at the bottom of the first. When Baltimore snuck in and got Lamar Jackson.
Yeah.
We did the same thing with Teddy Bridgewater. If one of those guys surfaces as this goes through. I thought that the defensive line, the edge rushers, and the defense, that's going to be a very strong class this year. So if you need one of those, you're going to be able to get one of those. The position, the tight ends, there's going to be a lot of athletic tight ends coming out in this draft class as well. And it's I'd hate to say this, but running backs, I don't know if I've ever seen a deeper class of running backs. Every time
Wow.
I turned on the tape, it was like, this guy can play. And it's like, this guy can play. And I was like, I got to go back. Are all these guys I'm watching can play? But I think
you're like checking yourself.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Self-scout.
That's
but
awesome.
all of I think it's going to be a very deep running back class. You know, you got the two from Ohio State coming in. You got the kid at Boise. A lot of those kids down at the Senior Bowl, people may have not recognized their names, but they're going to play in the league. So Harvey, the kid from UCF, Central Florida, was an interesting prospect. And so I think those are probably, just from what I know today, probably the strongest positions.
That's awesome. I told you I'd end it here. I mean, obviously the Vikings, the number one conversation around here that I've been asked 7,200 times already is related to the quarterback situation, and obviously Sam Darnold and what they should do, and J.J. McCarthy's readiness and all that. How do you view that situation just from what you saw in 2024 with Sam Darnold? And obviously you did not see J.J. McCarthy because none of us did throughout the season, but just how do you view the situation as a whole?
Yeah, Kevin O'Connell and that staff did a phenomenal job with Sam Darnold. It was like we saw the resurrection of Baker Mayfield when he got down to Tampa, and what Dave Canales did and Liam Cohen continued to do with him. So they did identify a quarterback, which is hard to do, and I think Kevin O'Connell deserves to be Coach of the Year for what he's done, and is becoming known as one of those quarterback whisperers. So they have a tough decision to make. I think it may have been easier if J.J. McCarthy didn't get hurt, because J.J. played very well in that first preseason game.
Yeah.
There's no question about the intangibles and everything. But when he went on IR, he didn't practice all year. So he was in meetings. I'm sure he was there rehabbing and everything, but he wasn't out there practicing on the field. So going into next year, it's going to be his rookie year all over again, you know. So it'll be interesting to see which direction they go, what decisions they make. But I think that I don't know if they can go wrong with either choice they make.
It's awesome. Well, I appreciate you taking the time. I know you, like we said, you got a lot going on. It's Super Bowl week, stuff around the house. So I appreciate it as always. I learn every time we talk. So thank you for the time, Rick. I really appreciate you doing it.
Okay, thanks, Alec.
And that'll do it for episode 56 of the Alec Lewis Show. A quicker conversation than normal, but appreciate Rick giving 20 minutes. He'd had a busy day, and for him to make time was pretty cool. Hope you guys enjoyed the perspective. I mean, it's, like I said at the top, people have opinions, people have perspective. When you don't win a Super Bowl, I think all that criticism can be very well warranted. But I think the perspective is important. I had a listener ask me if I could bring someone on who had a team building perspective. And he sat in the chair for, I believe, about a decade. So really good perspective. I think his thoughts and comments and praise of Kevin O'Connell, to me, were very noteworthy. I also thought the perspective he had on the running back class in the draft is something I've heard frequently from people. So to hear him say that is validating and is good perspective as we think about the draft as a whole. And then just his view on working with analytics to view the hit rates in certain aspects of in certain rounds of the draft. Like, I don't think you can overestimate just the perspective on some of that stuff, because it is what you hear often talking to people inside the business. But appreciate his perspective. It's a cool one going into the Super Bowl. I didn't give a ton of my thoughts at the top, but I'm very interested. We talked about the trenches, but how can this Chiefs front, specifically at left tackle and right tackle, Jawan Taylor and potentially Joe Tooney sliding out there, how do they hold up against this Eagles pass rush that has just gotten better and better over the course of the year, with guys like Milton Williams, Nolan Smith, Jalen Carter? These guys really have come on. And then to me, the Chiefs defensive front, whether it's Chris Jones, whether it's George Karlaftis, whether it is, we could go on, even their second level, Nick Bolton and Leo Chenal, and those guys playing the run. can they commit to stopping Saquon Barkley? And even if they do commit, which you know they will commit, can they stop him? If they can, and if they can force Jalen Hurts to throw the football downfield, I would take my chances there. Jalen Hurts is a guy that holds the ball. I don't know how well he sees the field without time to really sit back there and see it. So I've said it. I wrote it for our predictions at The Athletic, but like this stuff, these picks for me are about trust. And I trust the head coach of the Chiefs more than I trust the head coach of the Eagles. I trust the quarterback of the Chiefs more than I trust the quarterback of the Eagles. The coordinators, I mean, I really think highly of Vic Fangio and the job he has done overall and against Patrick Mahomes in the past, but I'm still taking Steve Spagnuolo and the experience he has in some of these games to get the job done. So I'm picking the Chiefs. It's not going crazy on a whim. I could very well be wrong because I have the utmost respect for Saquon Barkley as a runner, and then the job that the Eagles have done holistically in building that defense. I mean, they drafted, Rick said it, but Cooper DeJean and Quinyon Mitchell, who have stepped in at cornerback and done a phenomenal job. So can't wait to watch the game. Going to be home watching with my dad, probably some white chicken chili, hanging out and enjoying it and listening to the analysis the way I like to enjoy these big games that we'll remember. So can't wait to see it. Looking forward to Kendrick Lamar, who was phenomenal at halftime. But appreciate you guys being here as always. Enjoy the game on Sunday. Like and subscribe to the podcast. Hit that little arrow. That stuff helps us out. But appreciate you guys being here. Like I said, we will be back next week with a couple more shows. Any suggestions, advice, ideas on guests, throw those in the comment section. I am always watching, listening, curious to see what you guys want to hear. But that'll do it for episode 56 of the Alec Lewis Show. Have a great weekend. We will talk to you guys very, very soon.